The millionaire met a young woman and announced in front of everyone that she would be his wife. On their honeymoon, the young woman made a revelation. She was a virgin. The millionaire was shocked by the revelation and started to reconsider everything. If this story caught your attention, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching from. Alexander Reed didn't acquire his empire by being reasonable. At 43, he commanded a real estate development conglomerate that stretched from Manhattan to San Francisco, with a personal fortune estimated at over $4 billion. The Seattle skyline, where 3 gleaming towers bore his name, was a testament to his relentless ambition. Rain tapped against the floor-to-ceiling windows of his corner office as Alexander studied the proposal before him. The Riverfront Renaissance project would transform 30 blocks of Portland's neglected waterfront district into a modern urban paradise. Luxury apartments, boutique shopping, tech innovation centers, and designated green spaces strategically placed to appease environmental critics. "You've read the numbers," said Warren Hayes, his CFO. "We're looking at a 15% ROI minimum, 20% if we push the commercial leasing hard enough." Alexander nodded, taking in the view of Elliott Bay. The Pacific Northwest had been good to him, its boom and bust cycles providing fertile ground for a man who knew how to capitalize on others' misfortunes. That's what his father had taught him before drinking himself into an early grave: always be the one holding the cards when others fold. "And the locals?" Alexander asked, knowing the answer. "Some resistance expected. Nothing we haven't handled before." Warren adjusted his tie. "The mayor's office is fully on board. Councilman Parker will shepherd the zoning changes through." "Good." Alexander closed the folder. "Let's move forward with the architectural phase. I want exceptional talent on this, someone who can give us both vision and practicality. Something iconic that doesn't blow the budget." 2 weeks later, Alexander sat through presentations from Portland's top architectural firms. Glossy renderings, ambitious proposals, safe choices, none inspired him. Then Emma Daniels walked in. She wasn't what he expected. No power suit or designer heels, just vintage jeans, a simple blouse, and a blazer that had seen better days. At 34, Emma carried herself with an unassuming confidence that caught his attention immediately. Her portfolio was impressive: sustainable design awards, community projects, and a remarkable talent for preserving historical elements while creating modern spaces. "Mr. Reed," she began, her voice clear and unfaltering, "I'm not going to show you renderings of shiny towers that could exist anywhere. Portland isn't anywhere, it's a city with soul." She proceeded to outline a vision that preserved the waterfront's industrial heritage while transforming it into livable, workable spaces. Community gardens on rooftops, affordable studios for local artists, restored warehouses converted to mixed-use spaces that honored their history. "This approach will cost 5% more up front," she concluded, "but will yield sustainable returns and community goodwill that money simply can't buy." Warren was already shaking his head. But Alexander found himself intrigued not just by her ideas, but by her. Emma Daniels didn't seem intimidated by his reputation or his wealth. She looked him directly in the eyes, challenged his assumptions, and didn't once attempt to flatter him. "Interesting perspective, Ms. Daniels," he said after her presentation. "Walk with me." They strolled through Pioneer Square, Seattle's historic district, as Alexander peppered her with questions. Her answers were thoughtful, never rushed. She'd grown up in Portland's Riverfront district, the very neighborhood his project would transform. Her father had been a dock worker, her mother a school teacher. Emma had worked her way through college and architecture school on scholarships and part-time jobs. "So this project is personal for you," Alexander observed. "All projects should be personal, Mr. Reed, otherwise what's the point?" He found himself smiling. "Call me Alexander." That night, alone in his Lake Washington mansion, Alexander couldn't stop thinking about Emma Daniels. She represented everything he typically dismissed: idealism, community-mindedness, artistic integrity over profit margins. Yet something about her clarity of purpose resonated with him, reminded him of a younger version of himself, before wealth and power had become ends in themselves. The next morning he called Warren. "I want Daniel's architecture for the Portland project." "Are you serious? Her firm is tiny. They've never handled anything close to this scale." "Then pair her with someone who has, but I want her vision leading this." "This is about more than architecture, isn't it?" Warren asked carefully. Alexander hung up without answering. Of course it was about more than architecture. Everything was about more than what it appeared to be on the surface. That's how he'd built his empire, seeing the angles others missed. Over the next 3 months, Emma shuttled between Portland and Seattle, meeting with Alexander's team weekly. Their interactions were professional but charged with an undeniable electricity. He found reasons to extend meetings, schedule site visits, discuss minutiae that could have been handled by subordinates. For her part, Emma maintained boundaries with practiced precision. She was well aware of Alexander's reputation with women, the string of models and socialites who had briefly caught his interest before being discarded. She had no intention of becoming another conquest. What she didn't know was that Alexander Reed had never encountered a woman quite like her before. Women in his world typically fell into predictable categories: those who wanted his money, those who wanted his influence, or those who wanted the status of being with him. Emma appeared to want none of these things. She wanted to create something meaningful, something lasting. After a particularly intense design meeting where Emma had stood her ground against cost-cutting measures, Alexander invited her to dinner at Canlis, Seattle's most exclusive restaurant. "To discuss the project," he clarified. Of course, she agreed, though both knew the boundary between professional and personal was blurring. Over Washington wines and perfectly prepared salmon, they spoke less about architectural details and more about philosophies. He told her about growing up with a brilliant but destructive father who had built and lost 3 fortunes before Alexander turned 18. She shared stories of her tight-knit community in Portland, where neighbors looked after each other despite having little material wealth. "You've never married," she observed, surprising him with her directness. "I've never found a reason compelling enough," he answered honestly. "My parents' marriage was instructive in all the wrong ways. And yet you build homes for thousands of people." Alexander considered this. "I build properties. Whether they become homes depends on factors beyond my control." "Nothing is beyond your control from what I've heard," Emma said, a hint of challenge in her voice. He studied her face in the candlelight. Her carefully cultivated illusion, I assure you. As weeks turned to months, their professional relationship deepened, even as both resisted acknowledging the growing personal connection. Emma's vision for the Portland riverfront began taking concrete shape, a revolutionary blend of preservation and innovation that was garnering national attention in architectural circles. Then came the Charity Gala in Portland, a fundraiser for urban education, where Reed Enterprises was the primary sponsor. Alexander spotted Emma across the ballroom, wearing a simple black dress that somehow outshone all the designer gowns around her. She was speaking animatedly with an older man Alexander recognized as Congressman James Wilson, a powerful figure in Oregon politics. "They go way back," said a voice beside him. Alexander turned to find Sophia Mercer, his former business partner and ex-lover. James mentored Emma when she was starting out, practically a father figure after her dad passed away. "I didn't know you were acquainted with Ms. Daniels," Alexander replied, keeping his tone neutral despite his surprise at Sophia's presence. Their partnership had ended badly 3 years earlier, when he'd discovered her diverting company funds to personal ventures. "Portland's architecture community is small," Sophia said with a knowing smile, "and I make it my business to know who's in Alexander Reed's orbit these days." Before he could respond, Emma approached them, her expression shifting subtly as she registered Sophia's presence. "Ms. Daniels," Alexander said, perhaps too formally. "You know Ms. Mercer?" "By reputation," Emma answered diplomatically. Sophia laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Don't believe everything you hear, darling, though if Alexander's involved, the truth is usually more interesting than the rumors." She touched Alexander's arm possessively before gliding away. "Former business partner," he explained, noting the question in Emma's eyes. "Among other things, from what I understand," Emma replied. Later that evening, as the event wound down, Alexander found Emma on the rooftop terrace, looking out at the Willamette River the very waterfront they were planning to transform. "Your vision for this project is remarkable," he said, standing beside her at the railing. "You see possibilities where others see only profit margins." "And you?" she asked, turning to face him. "What do you see, Alexander?" The moment stretched between them, fraught with unspoken tension. In her eyes he saw something he'd been missing, something authentic and uncompromised. "I see you," he said finally. Then, with a decisiveness that had built his empire, "Marry me." Emma's expression shifted from surprise to disbelief. "That's not funny." "I'm not joking," Alexander replied, surprised by his own words, yet absolutely certain of them. "I want you in my life, permanently. We barely know each other, and I'm not one of your acquisitions." "I know enough," he insisted. "I know you have integrity and vision. I know you challenge me in ways no one has in years. I know I think about you constantly." "This is absurd," Emma said, but she didn't walk away. "I've built my life on recognizing value, Emma, on knowing what I want and pursuing it relentlessly. I want you, not as an employee or a temporary diversion, as my wife." "Your wife," she repeated, testing the word. "Yes," he said simply. "Consider it a business proposition if that makes it easier. A merger of complementary strengths." A small smile played at her lips. "You're proposing marriage as a business arrangement?" "I'm proposing marriage as the only arrangement that makes sense for what I feel for you," Alexander replied, reaching for her hand. "Say yes." Those two letters would change everything, for both of them. The Maldives sparkled like scattered emeralds on a velvet blue canvas. Alexander and Emma's private villa extended over crystal waters, the epitome of isolated luxury. Their whirlwind courtship had culminated in a private ceremony at Alexander's estate, just 3 weeks after his unexpected proposal. Now wrapped in thousand-thread-count sheets, they existed in a bubble of newfound intimacy. "I never thought I'd be here," Emma whispered, watching the sunrise from their bed. "With someone like you." Alexander traced her silhouette against the golden light. "Someone like me?" "A man who buys islands when he's bored," she teased, though there was a hint of genuine wonder in her voice. The distance between her upbringing and his reality remained vast. He pulled her closer. "I've never bought an island. Considered it once or twice, though." Their laughter faded into a comfortable silence. 3 days into their honeymoon, Alexander had discovered something that shook his carefully constructed worldview. Emma was inexperienced in ways he hadn't anticipated. Their first night together had revealed her innocence. She had chosen to wait, valuing genuine connection over physical gratification. The revelation had humbled him profoundly. "Why me?" he asked, voicing a question that had lingered since that discovery. "You could have chosen anyone." Emma considered his question carefully. "Because beneath that ruthless businessman exterior, I glimpsed something real, something worth waiting for." Her words penetrated layers of defenses built over decades. Alexander Reed, master negotiator and corporate shark, found himself vulnerable in ways contracts and lawyers couldn't protect against. It was terrifying. It was exhilarating. "I don't know how to do this," he admitted. "Be someone's husband. Be worthy of what you've given me." She pressed her palm against his chest. "Then we'll figure it out together." Those 2 weeks in paradise created a foundation neither had experienced before. Honest conversations between moonlit swims, shared dreams while walking endless beaches, and a physical connection that transcended anything in Alexander's considerable past. For the first time in his adult life, he began to believe in possibilities beyond accumulation and conquest. But paradise, by definition, cannot last forever. Their return to Seattle coincided with the next phase of the Portland Riverfront project. The honeymoon bubble burst as they re-entered the high-pressure world of 8-figure deals and competing interests. Emma established her own workspace within Reed Enterprises headquarters, but maintained her Portland office as well. Alexander found himself unusually distracted, checking his watch during meetings, looking forward to evenings at home with an intensity that bemused his executives. "You seem different," Warren commented one afternoon, after Alexander suggested, They postpone a lucrative acquisition to focus resources on the Portland project. "I'm married," Alexander replied simply, as if that explained everything. Perhaps it did. 6 weeks after their return, Emma received an unexpected visitor at her Portland office. Congressman James Wilson appeared unannounced, closing her door with unusual solemnity. "We need to talk about Riverfront," he said without preamble. "I was going to send you the updated plans next week," Emma replied, gesturing to the scale model that dominated her workspace. "We've incorporated most of the community feedback from the forums." James shook his head. "That's not why I'm here, Emma. I'm concerned about the direction this is taking, about your involvement." His tone set off warning bells. "What do you mean? Look, I've known you since you were drawing buildings in crayon. I've supported your career from the beginning, but getting involved with Alexander Reed personally and professionally, it's complicated things." Emma stiffened. "My marriage is separate from this project." "Nothing is separate when it comes to Reed," James said. "Do you know about Phase 3 of the development? The parts that aren't in your pretty renderings?" "What are you talking about?" James pulled out a folder. "The community center you designed. Once approvals go through, it gets scaled back to half its size. Those affordable housing units, quietly converted to luxury, condos after the tax incentives are secured. And that historic warehouse district you're so carefully preserving, slated for reassessment in year 5 of the project." Emma's stomach clenched as she examined the documents, internal memos, revised projections, preliminary agreements with vendors, all suggesting a bait-and-switch operation that would effectively eliminate the elements that had made her most proud of the design. Alexander wouldn't do this, she insisted, though the evidence before her was compelling. "Not without consulting me. He's a businessman, Emma, a brilliant one. This is what he does, presents something beautiful to get approval, then gradually transforms it into something profitable." James's expression softened. "I don't think he's intentionally deceiving you. He probably assumes you understand how these things work." "These things," Emma repeated hollowly. "You mean lying to a community, promising one thing and delivering another?" "I mean realistic development in a capitalist system," James corrected. "Look, I'm not here to cause problems between you and your husband. I just want you to go into this with open eyes. Your name is on these designs. Your reputation is at stake." After James left, Emma sat motionless, staring at the scale model she'd poured her heart into. The neighborhood where she'd grown up, where her father had worked the docks for 30 years, where her mother had taught generations of children, would be transformed, but not in the way she'd envisioned, not in a way that honored its history or its people. That evening in their Seattle penthouse, Emma confronted Alexander with the documents. "Where did you get these?" he asked, his expression unreadable. "Does it matter? Are they accurate?" Alexander chose his words carefully. They're early projections, contingency plans, standard practice in developments of this scale. Contingency plans that completely undermine everything I've designed, everything the community has been promised. "Emma," Alexander said, reaching for her hand, which she pulled away. "Business requires flexibility. Markets change. Regulations shift. These are just potential scenarios." "These outline a deliberate strategy to deceive the public," she countered. "To use my designs, my reputation, my connection to the community as a smokescreen while you implement something entirely different." His silence told her everything. "Did you know about this when you hired me?" Her voice wavered. "When you married me, was I just a convenient local face to sell your project?" "That's not fair," Alexander said, anger flaring. "What I feel for you has nothing to do with this development." "Everything has to do with everything, Alexander. You told me you wanted my vision. You said you valued my perspective. Was that all just part of the negotiation?" The argument escalated, revealing fault lines in their hastily built union. Emma stormed out, returning to her Portland apartment for the first time since their marriage. Alexander didn't follow her, a mistake born of pride and the habit of letting people come to him. The next morning, Emma found herself walking through her old neighborhood, the very streets the Riverfront project would transform. She stopped, At Riverside Community Center, where her mother had volunteered for decades. Inside, a community meeting was underway, residents discussing the very development she'd been designing. Ms. Daniels. Mrs. Rodriguez, her former high school counselor, spotted her. Or I guess it's Mrs. Reed now. We've been hoping you'd join us. The room fell quiet as Emma entered. These were her people, the families she'd grown up with, the community that had supported her when her father fell ill, that had celebrated when she received her architecture scholarship. Tell us about the project, someone called out. The real story, not the PR version. Emma took a deep breath. She had a choice to make. The professional part of her, the architect who had signed contracts and confidentiality agreements, knew she should stick to approved talking points. But the daughter of the riverfront couldn't lie to these faces. The plans you've seen, there may be changes coming that aren't public yet, she began carefully. For the next hour, she walked a delicate line, not directly betraying Alexander's business interests, but ensuring the community understood they needed to be vigilant, to get guarantees in writing, to demand oversight committees with real authority. Unbeknownst to Emma, Sophia Mercer sat in the back of the room, recording every word. Meanwhile, Alexander was dealing with his own crisis. A call from Warren had pulled him into an emergency meeting. We have a situation with the Portland approvals, Warren explained as Alexander entered the conference room. Congressman Wilson is suddenly asking for additional environmental impact studies. He's raised concerns about historical preservation that weren't issues a month ago. Wilson? Alexander frowned. He's been our strongest ally on this project. Not anymore, said their political consultant. Something's changed. He's talking about community interests and developmental responsibility now, using phrases that sound an awful lot like your wife's design philosophy, actually. Alexander absorbed this. Get me a meeting with Wilson, today. The meeting took place at a private club in Portland that evening. James Wilson, silver-haired and Senate ambitious, didn't bother with pleasantries. Your wife is quite passionate about her community, he began. Makes one wonder if you fully vetted her before bringing her into such a sensitive project. My wife's qualifications are impeccable, Alexander replied coolly, as is her integrity. Integrity, Wilson repeated with a slight smile. Interesting. Choice of words. Tell me, does integrity include showing confidential business documents to outside parties? Alexander's expression didn't change, though his mind raced. I'm not sure what you're implying. I'm not implying anything. I'm telling you that your Phase 3 plans, the real ones, not the pretty pictures for the Planning Commission, are now in my possession. Emma was quite distressed to learn about them. You approached my wife with stolen documents. Wilson waved dismissively. Let's not quibble about sources. The point is, the community is organizing. There will be resistance to this project unless significant changes are made. Changes that coincidentally align with your political interests, Alexander asked. Changes that protect my constituents, Wilson corrected, and possibly benefit all parties involved. I've taken the liberty of drafting some revisions to our agreement. The congressman slid a folder across the table. Alexander didn't open it. You're attempting to leverage my wife's trust in you for political gain, Alexander said, his voice dangerously soft. That's a miscalculation on your part. Is it? Emma trusts me. She grew up looking to me as a mentor when her own father was too sick to guide her. Meanwhile, her husband of 2 months, has been planning to dismantle her community while using her as the friendly local face of destruction. Alexander stood. This meeting is over. Think carefully, Reed, Wilson called after him. Your usual tactics won't work here. Not with Emma involved. Not with what I know. That night, Alexander returned to their penthouse to find Emma packing a suitcase. Going somewhere? He asked from the doorway. She didn't look up. Back to Portland. I need time to think. About us? Or about the project? Is there a difference? She asked, finally meeting his gaze. You made me the face of something that would ultimately betray everything I believe in. Everything I told you mattered to me. Business and personal life are separate, Emma. Not for me, they aren't. And I don't think they are for you either, she challenged. You pursued me because of my vision for this project. You married me. Because, actually, I'm not sure why you married me anymore. Alexander crossed the room, taking her hands despite her resistance. I married you because you saw through me, because you weren't impressed by my wealth or power, because for the first time in decades I met someone I couldn't predict or control. Emma's eyes filled with tears. And yet the first thing you did was try to control me, to use my reputation, my community connections for your financial gain. That's not, Alexander began, then stopped himself. Was she wrong? Had he unconsciously seen her as another asset to acquire, another angle to exploit? I need time, Emma repeated, pulling away. Wilson approached you with those documents, didn't he? Alexander asked. He's playing both sides, Emma, using your idealism against my pragmatism. There's more happening here than you realize. Then help me realize it, she pleaded. Be honest with me, completely honest, about what this project really is, about what you really want from me. Alexander hesitated, a fatal pause that spoke volumes. That's what I thought, Emma said quietly, closing her suitcase. Call me when you're ready to have that conversation. As she reached the door, Alexander found his voice. I've never let anyone walk away from me, Emma, not since I was old enough to stop them. She turned, her expression a mixture of sadness and determination. There's a first time for everything, Alexander. Even for you. After she left, Alexander stood motionless in their bedroom, surrounded by the trappings of wealth that had always insulated him from emotional pain. But nothing could shield him from the hollow feeling in his chest, the realization that he might have gained an empire but lost the one person who made it meaningful. His phone vibrated with a text from Warren. Emergency meeting tomorrow, 8 a.m. Sophia Mercer claims to have compromising information about Portland, says it's urgent. The game was getting more complicated by the hour, and for the first time in his career, Alexander Reed wasn't certain he wanted to play. Sophia Mercer's smile reminded Alexander of a shark circling wounded prey. She sat across from him in the Reed Enterprises conference room, impeccably dressed in a power suit that cost more than most people's monthly salary. The table between them might as well have been an ocean, given the distance it represented. I always knew you'd marry eventually, she said, examining her manicured nails. But an idealistic architect from the very neighborhood you're planning to demolish, that's almost poetic, Alexander. Did you plan it that way, or was it a happy accident? What do you want, Sophia? Alexander kept his voice level, though his patience was wearing thin. 3 days had passed since Emma left for Portland. 3 days of unanswered calls and terse text messages. Always direct, that's what I admired about you. Sophia opened her leather portfolio. I want back in. Not as your partner, those days are behind us, but as a major investor in the Portland project. Alexander raised an eyebrow. After what happened last time? You diverted company funds, Sophia. You betrayed my trust. Ancient history, she dismissed with a wave of her hand, and irrelevant to our current situation. I have information that could derail your entire Portland development, including a recording of your wife, essentially warning the community about your real plans for their neighborhood. Alexander's expression remained impassive, though his mind raced. Emma had spoken publicly about the project. Additionally, Sophia continued, I've come into possession of some interesting documentation regarding permits for your Seattle developments from 5 years ago, permits that appear to have been expedited through unusual channels. Now Alexander understood. Blackmail, Sophia, really? I prefer to call it leverage. You have something I want, a stake in what promises to be the most profitable development in the Pacific Northwest. I have something you want, silence about both your professional and personal vulnerabilities. And if I refuse, Sophia's smile widened, then things get messy, for your company, for your marriage, for your legacy. Is that what you want, Alexander? To watch it all burn? The metaphor proved eerily prophetic. That very night, a fire broke out in the Reed Enterprises document storage facility in Portland, a separate building where physical copies of project materials were kept. Security footage showed a slim figure in dark clothing entering shortly before the alarms triggered. The fire was contained to a single room, but the damage was significant, specifically to the historical documentation section of the Riverfront project. By morning, Portland police had opened an investigation. By afternoon, rumors circulated that the fire was connected to growing community opposition to the development. By evening, anonymous sources suggested Emma Reed might have been involved, given her recent public comments and personal connection to the neighborhood. Emma was having dinner with her mother when she received the news. Catherine Daniels, A.E., retired schoolteacher still living in the modest home where Emma grew up, watched her daughter's face drain of color as she read the text message. "What is it, honey?" "There was a fire at the document storage facility and people are saying I might be involved." Emma's hands trembled. "Mum, I would never—" "Of course you wouldn't," Catherine said firmly. "Anyone who knows you would understand that. The problem is I spoke at that community meeting. I hinted that there were plans that hadn't been made public, and now documents are destroyed and people think—" Emma's phone rang. Alexander's name flashed on the screen. She hesitated before answering. "Are you okay?" His voice was tense but concerned. "I didn't do it," she said immediately. "Alexander, you have to believe me." "I know you didn't," he replied without hesitation. "But someone wants it to look like you did. Where are you?" "At my mother's house. Stay there, I'm sending security. Don't talk to anyone until I arrive." "You're coming to Portland?" Emma asked, surprised. "I'm already on the way. My plane lands in 30 minutes. Alexander arrived at Catherine Daniels' modest home in the heart of the Riverfront district shortly after midnight, 2 security personnel positioned themselves discreetly outside while he spoke with Emma and her mother in the living room, surrounded by family photos and well-worn furniture. "The police will want to question you," he said, pacing the small space. "I've already spoken with our attorneys. They'll be present for any interviews." "I don't need attorneys," Emma protested. "I haven't done anything wrong." "This isn't about guilt or innocence," Alexander explained. "It's about perception and protection. Someone is trying to frame you, Emma, someone who knows about our disagreement." Catherine watched this exchange with a mother's perceptive eye. "You two need to talk privately. I'll make some tea." When they were alone, the weight of unspoken words hung between them. Alexander moved to the window, looking out at the neighborhood. Streets and buildings he had planned to transform, lives he had calculated as figures on a spreadsheet. "I never meant for you to get caught in the crossfire," he said finally. "Didn't you?" Emma's voice was quiet but steady. "You hired me knowing who I was, knowing my connection to this community. You pursued me, Alexander. You made me the public face of this project." He turned to face her. "Yes, I pursued you. Yes, I wanted your talent and your local credibility, but that's not why I married you." "Then why did you?" The question hung in the air between them, a challenge and a plea wrapped into 3 simple words. "Because you terrified me," he admitted. "Not with threats or demands, but with possibility. You made me see a version of myself I'd forgotten could exist." Emma's expression softened slightly. "And now? Now we're being manipulated, both of us, by people who want to use our relationship as a weapon." "Sophia Mercer," Emma guessed. Alexander nodded. "And James Wilson. They're working together. Though I doubt either would admit it. Sophia wants financial control. Wilson wants political capital. And what do you want, Alexander?" Before he could answer, his phone vibrated. Warren's name appeared on the screen. "I need to take this," he said, stepping into the kitchen. Warren's news was grim. Local news stations had received anonymous tips about Emma's supposed involvement in the fire. Social media was already buzzing with conspiracy theories. Reed Enterprises stock had dropped 3 points in after-hours trading. "The board's calling for damage control," Warren explained. "They want you to distance yourself from Emma, at least publicly, until this blows over." "That's not happening," Alexander replied firmly. "Alexander, be reasonable. This could tank the entire project. We're talking hundreds of millions in potential losses." "I'll handle it." Alexander ended the call and returned to the living room, where Emma sat with her mother, both clutching mugs of tea. "It's getting worse, isn't it?" Emma asked, reading his expression. Nothing we can't manage, he assured her, though the confidence in his voice didn't quite reach his eyes. Catherine set down her mug. Emma told me about the real plans for this neighborhood. About what happens to people like me in your vision. Alexander met her gaze directly. The plans are still evolving, Mrs. Daniels. Call me Catherine, she replied. And don't patronize me. I taught children for 40 years. I know when someone is avoiding the truth. Emma watched this exchange with a mixture of apprehension and hope. Her mother had always been perceptive, cutting through pretense with the precision of a surgeon. You're right, Alexander admitted finally. The original financial models depended on maximum return, which meant eventually pricing out current residents. That's the standard playbook for developments like this. And now, Catherine pressed, now I'm not sure about anything except that. I won't let Emma take the fall for something she didn't do. He turned to Emma. I have resources, connections, let me fix this. By paying off the right people? Making problems disappear? Emma challenged. That's not fixing anything, Alexander. That's just applying the same broken system that got, just here. Then what do you suggest? The truth, she said simply. Complete transparency about the project, the original plans, the changes, everything. Let the community know what was intended and what's actually possible. Alexander laughed, humorlessly. You want me to publicly admit to a bait-and-switch development strategy? That would kill the project instantly. It would damage Reed Enterprises' reputation across all markets. It would also be the right thing to do, Catherine observed quietly. The three of them stayed up, late into the night, discussing possibilities, arguing approaches, sometimes sitting in exhausted silence. By morning, Emma had agreed to Alexander's legal protection, but not to his strategy of denial and diversion. As dawn broke over Portland, Emma stood on her mother's front porch, watching the neighborhood come alive. Mr. Ramirez opening his corner store, Mrs. Patel walking her dog, children gathering at the bus stop. This was what was at stake. Not just buildings and land values, but a living ecosystem of human connections. I need to know where you stand, she said to Alexander, who had joined her outside. Not as a businessman, not as someone protecting his investments, as my husband. Alexander watched the same scene, seeing it through new eyes. This wasn't just real estate, it was Emma's history, her foundation. People greeted her by name as they passed, asked about her mother, congratulated her on her recent marriage, unaware of the strain that union now faced. I stand with you, he said finally, whatever that means, whatever it costs. The declaration hung between them, powerful but abstract. Emma needed more than words. Prove it, she challenged quietly. Before Alexander could respond, his phone rang again. This time it was the Portland Police Department requesting Emma come in for questioning about the fire. The timing couldn't have been worse. The precinct building was an unremarkable structure downtown, its fluorescent lighting harsh against institutional green walls. Emma sat beside Alexander in an interview room, their attorneys flanking them like sentries. Detective Mark Collins, a veteran officer with tired eyes, conducted the questioning with methodical precision. Ms. Daniels, excuse me, Mrs. Reed, he began, can you account for your whereabouts between 8 p.m. and midnight 2 nights ago? Emma outlined her evening. Dinner with former colleagues, coffee with a friend, then home to her apartment to work on alternative designs for the riverfront project. Can anyone verify you were home during those later hours? Detective Collins asked. I was alone, Emma admitted, but I made several phone calls, sent emails. Those would have timestamps. We'll need to verify those, Collins made a note. Are you aware that several witnesses heard you express concerns about the project at a community meeting the day before the fire? I expressed concerns about transparency, Emma clarified, about ensuring community involvement in the development process. According to statements, you specifically mentioned plans that weren't public yet and suggested residents should be vigilant about the project, Alexander interrupted. My wife was expressing her professional opinion about community engagement. That's hardly motive for arson. Perhaps not, Collins acknowledged. But when documents related to a controversial development are destroyed one day after the lead architect suggests there are secret plans the public should worry about, Well, that creates questions. The interview continued for nearly 2 hours. Emma maintained her composure, answering truthfully while the attorneys interjected when questions became leading or speculative. Alexander remained a steady presence beside her, his hand occasionally finding hers beneath the table. As they left the precinct, reporters clustered on the steps, cameras flashing like lightning. Alexander instinctively stepped in front of Emma, shielding her from the barrage of questions. "Mrs. Reed, did you start the fire to protect your neighborhood?" "Mr. Reed, is this sabotage from within your own marriage? Is this the end of the riverfront project? Are there problems in your marriage already?" Their security team created a path to the waiting car. Once inside, Emma buried her face in her hands. "I never wanted any of this," she whispered. Alexander pulled her close. "I know, and I'm going to fix it." "How?" she asked, looking up at him. "By doing what you asked, telling the truth." His jaw was set with determination. "All of it." Back at Reed Enterprises' Portland office, Alexander called an emergency meeting with Warren and their crisis management team. Emma sat silently at his side as he outlined his intentions. "We're going to release all the original plans," he announced, "the public versions and the internal projections. Everything." Warren blanched. "That would be corporate suicide, Alexander. The shareholders would revolt. The board would remove you." "I'm still the majority shareholder," Alexander reminded him, "and this is my decision." "What about Sophia Mercer?" asked Diane Lee, their head of legal. "If we do this, we remove her leverage, but she could still release those permit documents." "Let her," Alexander said dismissively. "We'll deal with any fallout. The statute of limitations has passed on most of it anyway." Warren leaned forward, his expression grave. "And Congressman Wilson. He has significant influence with the regulatory bodies we need for approvals." "Wilson is overplaying his hand," Alexander replied. "He's too connected to this project already. If it falls apart completely, his political aspirations suffer too." The team continued debating strategies and consequences, but Alexander had made his decision. As the meeting concluded, he asked Emma to stay behind. When they were alone, he turned to her. "There's something you should know, something I discovered this morning." Emma tensed, preparing for more bad news. "The security footage from the fire, our tech team enhanced it. The person entering the building—" He hesitated. "It was Sophia Mercer." Emma's eyes widened. "Are you certain?" "Positive. We're turning the evidence over to the police today, but I wanted you to know first." "Why would she take such a risk?" Alexander's expression darkened. "Because she never expected to be identified. The fire was meant to destroy evidence of her past dealings with Reed Enterprises, documents that could implicate her in financial irregularities from years ago. Making it look like you were involved was just a bonus for her." "And Wilson? Is he connected to this too?" "I don't know yet," Alexander admitted, "but I intend to find out." That afternoon, Reed Enterprises issued an unprecedented press release. The company announced a complete reassessment of the riverfront project, including the release of all planning documents, both public and internal, and the formation of a community oversight committee with real authority over development decisions. Emma Reed was named as the chief liaison between the company and the community. The media response was immediate and intense. Business publications labeled it everything from corporate self-destruction to revolutionary stakeholder engagement. Local Portland papers cautiously praised the transparency while remaining skeptical of long-term intentions. Reed Enterprises stock dropped 15 points by closing bell. Meanwhile, Portland police issued an arrest warrant for Sophia Mercer on charges of arson and evidence tampering. She had already disappeared, her penthouse apartment emptied, her phone disconnected. That evening, as Alexander and Emma returned to her mother's house, a familiar car sat in the driveway. Congressman James Wilson had decided to pay a personal visit. They found him sitting in Catherine's living room, chatting amiably over tea as if nothing were amiss. "James," Emma acknowledged coolly as they entered. "Emma," Alexander. Wilson nodded to each of them. I thought it was time we had an honest conversation. About how you manipulated my wife, Alexander asked, his tone dangerously controlled. Or about how you're working with a woman who committed arson to frame her? I had nothing to do with that fire, Wilson said emphatically. Sophia Mercer may have been my ally on certain matters, but I never sanctioned anything illegal. Yet you used her information to pressure me, Alexander pointed out. Information that we now know she obtained through criminal means. Wilson set down his teacup carefully. Politics makes for uncomfortable bedfellows sometimes. I wanted to ensure my constituents were protected. That's my job. Your job, Emma interjected, was to represent people like my mother. Instead, you used their trust as currency in your political games. Catherine, who had been observing silently, finally spoke. I voted for you in every election, James. I hosted fundraisers in this very room when you first ran for city council. How could you use this community as a bargaining chip? Wilson had the grace to look uncomfortable. Catherine, I've always had the neighborhood's best interests at heart. No, she replied firmly. You've had your interests at heart. There's a difference. Alexander stepped forward. Here's what's going to happen, Congressman. You're going to publicly support the revised riverfront project, the one with real community benefits and genuine preservation efforts. You're going to distance yourself from Sophia Mercer, and you're going to apologize to Emma for implying she had anything to do with that fire. Wilson's political smile emerged. Or what, exactly? Or I release documentation showing you accepted improper campaign contributions from development interests 3 elections ago, including from Reed Enterprises under my father's leadership, contributions that coincided with zoning changes that benefited those same interests. The congressman's smile vanished. You would implicate your own company? My father's company, Alexander corrected. Different leadership, different era. We've since implemented rigorous ethics protocols. The statute of limitations protects the company, but the publicity wouldn't help your Senate campaign. A tense silence filled the room as Wilson calculated his options. Finally, he stood. I've always admired your strategic thinking, Alexander. It seems I underestimated just how far you'd go to protect your wife. He turned to Emma. For what it's worth, I never believed you set that fire, and I am sorry for how events unfolded. After Wilson left, Catherine looked at Alexander with newfound respect. You'd really have exposed your father's company's past actions. My father built his empire on compromises I've spent my career trying to undo, Alexander replied. Some legacies aren't worth protecting. That night, as Emma and Alexander prepared for bed in her childhood room, surrounded by academic trophies and architectural sketches from her youth, she finally asked the question that had been lingering since their confrontation days earlier. What changed, Alexander? When did the project become less important than principles? He looked at her thoughtfully. When I realized I was becoming my father, willing to sacrifice anything and anyone for the bottom line. When I saw myself through your eyes and didn't recognize the man I wanted to be. Emma moved closer to him. And who is that man? Someone worthy of you, Alexander said simply. Someone who builds things that last, not just structures, but trust. Someone who honors commitments, not just contracts, but promises. She placed his hand on her stomach, holding it there with significance. Then there's something you should know, something that makes those promises even more important. Alexander's expression shifted from confusion to realization. Emma nodded, tears forming in her eyes. I found out the day before the fire. I was waiting for the right moment to tell you, but then everything fell apart. Alexander pulled her into his arms, his own eyes damp. Nothing's falling apart, he whispered fiercely. Everything's finally coming together. As they held each other in the quiet safety of Emma's childhood home, the future began to take a different shape. One neither of them had originally designed, but that somehow felt more solid, more genuine than any blueprint they'd previously considered. The headlines in the Wall Street Journal couldn't have been more direct. Reed Enterprises stock plummets amid radical transparency push. Financial analysts questioned Alexander Reed's judgment. Business commentators debated whether his personal relationship had compromised his corporate responsibility. The board of directors called for an emergency meeting. Alexander faced them with characteristic composure in the gleaming conference room of Reed Tower, 50 stories above Seattle. 12 men and women who collectively represented billions, in wealth and decades of corporate experience, watched him warily. "This is unprecedented," said Eleanor Harrington, the longest-serving board member. "Releasing proprietary development strategies to the public, forming a community oversight committee with actual veto power. Alexander, what were you thinking?" "I was thinking long-term," he replied calmly. Beyond quarterly projections and annual reports. Charles Winston, a venture capitalist who had backed Alexander's earliest projects, leaned forward. "The market doesn't share your optimism. We've lost 22% of shareholder value in 3 days. Short-term volatility," Alexander dismissed. "The Portland Riverfront project represents less than 8% of our overall development portfolio. The principles we establish there will strengthen our position in every market." "Principles don't pay dividends," another board member interjected. Alexander's expression hardened slightly. "Neither does litigation. Neither does community opposition that delays projects for years. Neither does the talent exodus that occurs when a company develops a reputation for deception." He distributed folders containing his revised vision, not just for Portland, but for all Reed Enterprises developments moving forward. Ethically driven community engagement, transparent planning processes, sustainable profit models that prioritized long-term value over immediate returns. "This isn't charity," Alexander emphasized. "This is evolution. The most successful developments of the next decade will be the ones that communities embrace rather than endure." The debate continued for hours. Some board members threatened resignation. Others demanded Alexander step down as CEO while remaining chairman. Through it all, he maintained his position with the same ruthless determination that had built his empire, only now channeled toward a different kind of success. By meeting's end, Alexander had secured a narrow majority supporting his vision, though with conditions: a 6-month probationary period, enhanced reporting requirements, and contingency plans if community engagement failed to yield expected results. As the board members filed out, Eleanor Harrington remained behind. "Your father would be surprised by this turn," she noted, having known Thomas Reed for decades before his passing. "But not disappointed, I think," Alexander replied. Beneath his ruthlessness, he understood. Adaptation. He just never found a reason compelling enough to change his methods. Eleanor studied him thoughtfully. "And you have?" Alexander merely nodded, his mind already in Portland where Emma waited for him. Meanwhile, Emma faced her own professional crucible. Her firm's partners had called an emergency meeting to discuss her role in the riverfront controversy. "We've built our reputation on ethical design and community engagement," said Martin Chen, the senior partner. "Now our name is being dragged through the media as part of Reed Enterprises' bait-and-switch scheme. A scheme I exposed," Emma pointed out. "A scheme that's being corrected." Deborah Winters, another partner, sighed. "Emma, we value your work enormously, but there's an inherent conflict of interest now. You're married to the developer while serving as the architect. The professional boundaries are completely blurred." Emma understood their concerns. Her personal and professional lives had become inextricably tangled. Exactly what she had feared when Alexander first proposed to her, but separating them now seemed impossible, particularly with a child on the way. "What if I step back from other firm projects and focus exclusively on Riverfront?" she suggested. "With complete transparency to both you and the community, no hidden agendas, no privileged information." "That might work temporarily," Martin conceded, "but long-term, Emma, you'll need to make a choice. Being Mrs. Reed and being partner Daniels at this firm may not be compatible roles." The reality of his words settled heavily on her shoulders. Emma had worked her entire life to reach this position, scholarship student to intern to associate to partner. Now, just as she'd achieved her professional dreams, she faced losing them. As she left the meeting, her phone buzzed with a text from Alexander, Board meeting concluded. We have conditional approval, coming home tonight. Home, the concept, had become fluid lately. His Seattle penthouse, her Portland apartment, her mother's house. Where would they ultimately build their life together? Where would they raise their child? That evening, in Emma's apartment overlooking the Willamette River, she and Alexander sat on her small balcony, discussing the day's challenges. "So the board thinks you've lost your mind," Emma summarized, "and my partners think I've compromised my professional integrity." "Yet here we are," Alexander observed, "still standing." Emma leaned against him, watching the sunset paint the river in shades of gold and crimson. "For how long, though? This isn't sustainable, Alexander. We're trying to serve too many masters. Your shareholders, my firm, the community, each other." Alexander was quiet for a moment, considering her words. What if we removed some of those complications? How? "I've been thinking about Reed Enterprises' structure," he began carefully. "About succession planning, leadership transition." Emma turned to face him. "You're not considering stepping down?" "Not exactly. More like evolving." Alexander took her hand. "What if Reed Enterprises became Reed Foundation? What if we shifted our focus from pure development to community-centered urban renewal?" "You'd give up your company." Emma couldn't hide her skepticism. "Transform it," he corrected. "The development arm would continue, but under new leadership, with strict ethical guidelines and community engagement requirements. The foundation would focus on projects like riverfront, revitalization without displacement, preservation with purpose." Emma studied his face, searching for signs of doubt or regret. "You'd be walking away from billions in potential profits." "I'd be walking towards something more valuable," Alexander replied, his hand moving to rest gently on her stomach. "A legacy our child can be proud of." The sincerity in his voice brought tears to Emma's eyes. This was so far from the Alexander Reed who had commanded her to marry him just months earlier. The ruthless businessman who saw everything as an acquisition, every relationship as a transaction. "And what about me?" she asked. "Where do I fit in this new vision?" "Wherever you choose," Alexander said simply. "Lead the foundation's architectural division. Maintain your partnership at your firm, both, neither. The point is removing the conflict, not prescribing your path." Emma leaned forward and kissed him, not with passion, but with profound gratitude. For the first time since their whirlwind marriage began, she felt truly seen not as an asset or an obstacle, but as a partner with agency and value beyond what she could provide to his empire. The following weeks brought rapid change. Alexander formally announced his transition from CEO to executive chairman of Reed Enterprises, with a new leadership structure focused on ethical development practices. Simultaneously, he established the Reed Foundation with an initial endowment of $500 million dedicated to community-centered urban renewal projects nationwide. Emma maintained her partnership at her firm, but took a one-year sabbatical to establish the foundation's architectural vision. Together, she and Alexander redefined the Portland Riverfront project as the foundation's flagship initiative, a model for how development could honor a community's past while building its future. The media narrative shifted gradually from scandal to innovation. Business schools began analyzing the Reed transformation as a case study in corporate evolution. Urban planning forums invited both Emma and Alexander to speak about their integrated approach to community development. Sophia Mercer was eventually apprehended in Vancouver, attempting to flee to Asia. The evidence against her was overwhelming, not just for the arson, but for years of financial misconduct that had precipitated her original separation from Reed Enterprises. Her trial would eventually result in a 7-year sentence. Congressman Wilson survived the political fallout, though his Senate aspirations were delayed. He became an unlikely ally in the revised Riverfront project, recognizing that his political future in Portland depended on its success. By the time Emma reached her 3rd trimester, the Portland community's initial skepticism had transformed into cautious enthusiasm. The Oversight Committee, which included Emma's mother, Catherine, alongside local business owners, educators, and long-time residents, had real influence over development decisions. Historical buildings were being meticulously restored rather than demolished. Affordable housing units were integrated throughout the project rather than segregated to less desirable areas. On a crisp autumn morning, Emma stood beside Alexander at the official groundbreaking ceremony. Her growing belly was prominent beneath her coat as she addressed the gathered crowd, former neighbors, current residents, media, and political figures. "When I was a girl growing up just 3 blocks from here," she began, "this waterfront was both beautiful and broken. My father worked these docks through good times and bad. My mother taught in the school that stood where we're building the new community center. This neighborhood shaped who I am, taught me that beauty and function can coexist, that history provides foundation rather than limitation." She glanced at Alexander, who watched her with undisguised admiration. "Today we begin not by erasing that history, but by honoring it," she continued. "Not by displacing a community, but by strengthening it. The riverfront renaissance isn't about luxury condos or exclusive amenities. It's about creating spaces where families can thrive, businesses can grow, and culture can flourish, accessible to everyone, not just those with the deepest pockets." The applause was genuine, particularly from the neighborhood residents who had fought so hard for this outcome. Catherine Daniels stood in the front row, tears streaming unashamedly down her face as she watched her daughter bridge worlds that had seemed irreconcilable. After the ceremony, as attendees mingled over refreshments, Warren approached Alexander. "The financial press is still giving us grief," he noted. "Goldman's latest analysis questions whether the foundation model is sustainable." Alexander shrugged. "They're measuring the wrong metrics." "And the right metrics are," Alexander gestured, toward Emma, deep in conversation with a group of community elders whose families had lived in the neighborhood for generations. Their animated expressions and occasional laughter suggested a genuine exchange rather than the wary politeness that had characterized earlier interactions. "Legacy," Alexander said simply. "Authenticity. The kind of success that balance sheets can't capture." Warren shook his head with a bemused smile. "If anyone had told me Alexander Reed would become an idealist, I'd have questioned their sanity." "Not an idealist," Alexander corrected. "A realist with expanded horizons." Later that evening, as they prepared for bed in their newly renovated Portland home, a historic property near Emma's mother that they had carefully restored, Alexander found Emma standing at the window, hands cradling her belly. "He's active tonight," she said as he embraced her from behind, his hands joining hers. They had recently learned they were expecting a son. "Taking after his mother already," Alexander murmured against her hair. "Never still, always creating." Emma leaned back against him, savoring the moment of peace. "Are you ever going to tell me what made you change?" she asked quietly. "Really change, not just adapt for appearance's sake." Alexander was silent for a long moment, considering his answer carefully. "The night you left," he finally said, "I stood in our bedroom surrounded by everything money could buy and realized none of it mattered without you. I'd spent my entire adult life accumulating wealth, power, influence, believing they were the measures of success. But in that moment, I understood they were just substitutes for what I really wanted, which was connection, purpose, the chance to build something meaningful with someone who sees me clearly, both my strengths and my failures, and chooses to stay anyway." Emma turned in his embrace to face him. "I didn't just leave because of the project. I left because I needed to know if you would follow, if I was more to you than a convenient asset in a business strategy." "And now," he asked, vulnerability evident in his expression. "Now I know," she said simply, reaching up to touch his face. 6 weeks later, Thomas Catherine Reed entered the world after 22 hours of labor, named for both Alexander's father and Emma's mother. He arrived with a full head of dark hair and his mother's determined expression, as if he'd already planned his first architectural project. In the hospital room, as Alexander held his son for the first time, the final, pieces of his transformation locked into place. This tiny being represented everything he and Emma had built together. Not a tower or a development or a foundation, but a future that would require integrity, courage, and vision to shape properly. "Welcome to the world, Thomas," he whispered. "It's more complex and beautiful than I ever understood before your mother showed me how to really see it." Emma watched them from her hospital bed, exhausted but radiant. "He'll have the best of both of us," she said. "Your determination and my idealism." "Poor kid," Alexander joked, though his eyes were suspiciously bright. "He doesn't stand a chance at a normal life." "Normal is overrated," Emma replied, reaching for her son as Alexander carefully transferred him back to her arms. "We'll teach him something better, how to build bridges between different worlds, how to honor the past while creating the future." As the small family shared this perfect moment of connection, neither Emma nor Alexander could have predicted all the challenges still ahead. The continued resistance from traditional business interests, the complexities of community-centered development, the delicate balance of professional and personal commitments. But they had built a foundation stronger than any skyscraper, one based on shared purpose, mutual respect, and the courage to evolve beyond their original designs. In the riverfront district, construction proceeded with unprecedented community involvement. Buildings rose that honored Portland's industrial heritage while creating space for its future growth. Longtime residents found themselves not displaced, but elevated, their stories and needs woven into the fabric of the development. Emma's vision and Alexander's resources combined to create something neither could have achieved alone. 1 year after Thomas's birth, on a sunny spring afternoon, the first phase of the riverfront renaissance opened to the public. A former warehouse had been transformed into a vibrant marketplace where local artisans and entrepreneurs showcased their work. The adjacent plaza, once a neglected loading dock, now featured gardens designed with input from neighborhood children. Alexander stood at the edge of the crowd during the opening ceremony, holding Thomas while Emma delivered remarks alongside community leaders. His son, alert and curious even at 12 months, watched his mother with evident fascination. "That's your extraordinary mother," Alexander told him quietly. "She taught me that the most valuable things can't be bought or sold. They can only be built day by day, choice by choice." As Emma concluded her speech and the ribbon was cut, cheers erupted from the gathered crowd. She made her way through well-wishers to join her husband and son. "Well?" she asked, taking Thomas into her arms. "What do you think?" Alexander surveyed the scene, the restored buildings, the integrated community spaces, the diverse crowd celebrating together. Most importantly, he observed his wife and son, their faces alight with joy and possibility. "I think," he said, pulling them both close, "that some promises are worth rewriting entirely." Dear listeners, we hope Alexander and Emma's journey from conflict to connection has touched your hearts. Their story reminds us that true transformation is possible when we have the courage to rebuild not just our surroundings, but ourselves. For more emotionally rich narratives that explore the complexities of love, ethics, and personal growth, please subscribe to our channel and click the like button below. We bring you unique stories daily that challenge and inspire. What transformation would you like to see in your own life? Share your thoughts in the comments,